The original legendary trio, them birds! Kinda surprised that no member of this legendary trio had been suggested for a Histories video, but I guess their popularity has waned over the years as more and more complex and interesting and powerful legendaries have been added. But some of that popularity has returned in recent times due to the addition of the Galarian legendary bird trio. Design wise, I love this choice. Typings, aesthetic, in-game gimmicks, I'm there for it. And yes, even their usability in the TCG brought me back in a way that I did not expect. So today we are beginning our analysis of these birds with numero Articuno. We're talking artwork, usability, and overall theme. As always, let's get into it, beginning with the very first printed Articuno way back in Fossil. So 3 specific energy, let alone 4 specific energy, is just too much of a cost for an attack in the early TCG. So on its own, Articuno isn't very usable outside of its partnership with Rain Dance Blastoise, which allows you to attach as many water energy from your hand to your water type Pokemon as you want per turn. So as long as you have the water energy in hand, you can attach them all. And getting the energy in your hand is pretty easy to do in base Fossil. So thanks to Pokemon Breeder, you can actually start firing off fully powered blizzards on your second turn. During base set's release and even base jungle, Blastoise kind of relied on Gyarados as its partner for dealing that high water type damage, but as soon as Articuno dropped in Fossil, that replaced the Gyarados because it's a stage 1 over a stage 2 and you don't have to worry about those fragile little Magikarps. Getting hit with an early game Blizzard can be brutal because not only is it stacking a big chunk of damage on your active, but it also has the potential for spread damage, which can add up if you get hit with that Blizzard turn after turn after turn while you're trying to get your own setup. Got this very stylized Mitsuhiro Arita artwork, and one thing that I'm going to emphasize during this video is Articuno artwork tends to be on the spectrum of either portraying Articuno as this mystical, mysterious, beautiful creature, more on the monster side of Pocket Monsters, while on the other end of the spectrum just drawing it as a blue bird with red eyes. Thankfully, Articuno's first printing here in Fossil leans more towards the prior. The next Articuno to see print was the Black Star promo, and like a lot of early promos, this one has a bit of a weird, complex history in that the very first version of this card was a Japanese exclusive promo that had different artwork and was distributed by All Nippon Airlines during the summer of 1999. So you could exchange 2 boarding pass stubs for a 2-card set that included this Articuno and a Flying Pikachu. When Wizards adapted the card over to English, they used the new artwork and used it as a promotional item for Pokemon the Movie 2000, The Power of One. So when you went to buy a ticket, you would get one of 3 cards featuring one of the 3 legendary birds, including this Articuno. The original artwork wouldn't see English print until Supreme Victors in 2009, 20 years later, and as for that Kimura artwork, it was used in a Japanese reprint in an Articuno promo for the Pokemon Web mini set, which I have an entire video dedicated to Pokemon Web, so go check that one out for more information. As far as usability goes, it is inferior to its Fossil counterpart, but as far as artwork goes, I really like this artwork. I will say though that the Japanese Pokemon Web version really makes the artwork pop so much better with the holofoil background. The next Articuno is another Black Star promo, one of the few vending series cards to get adapted into an English release. And you may notice that this does not use the vending series layout. In fact, it doesn't even use the original TCG layout. It uses the one that was updated for the Neo sets. In addition, this Articuno's Pokemon Power uses the updated Neo Block wording, which states that this power cannot be used if Articuno is affected by a special condition, rather than the classic cannot be used if Articuno is asleep, confused, or paralyzed, which is the wording used on the original Japanese version in the vending series. I have seen this card pop up in deck lists for base Neo Rain Dance decks that already use the fossil version of Articuno as a way to counter spread decks and sniping decks like Kingdra or Blaine's Charizard, but it's always just a one of. There was an Articuno in the Versus series in the form of Price's Articuno, and I'd be damned if this is not some excellent artwork. As expected for the Versus series, the card itself isn't much. Competitively, at least, for 3 water energy, you're dealing 30 damage with Icy Wind. You get guaranteed sleep on your opponent's active, but that's a pretty hefty cost for a low amount of damage and a special condition that your opponent can just flip out of. The e-reader sets did a very interesting thing to not only their legendary bird trio, but also the legendary beast trio that made it difficult to attach energy straight from your hand onto these Pokemon. In the case of the legendary birds, they had these immunity Pokebodies. In the case of Articuno from Skyridge, it meant that you couldn't attach water energy cards directly from your hand to Articuno. Now, the e-reader sets did include a lot of other Pokemon that could move energy from Pokemon to Pokemon. That way you weren't having to attach that water energy straight from your hand. My favorite method is just to use Aquapolis Lantern to attach lightning energy from your hand onto Articuno. Its body doesn't stop that. And then use a Lantern's Pokepower Ion Coating to just transform all of the lightning energy attached to Articuno into water energy before you attack. But is it even worth setting up some type of combo just to get to Ice Cyclone faster? Not really. Free Solid does have a way to get water energy onto Articuno without playing them from your hand, but you're going to have to do that twice just to get the 2 water energy for Ice Cyclone. By this time, you're still looking at a turn 3 or 4 50 damage attack that could potentially hurt your own bench Pokemon, and by then, a lot of other e-reader era decks are already dealing way more damage for 4 energy, so you're not going to be building any decks around Articuno or any of the legendary birds. Instead, they are great coverage cards. You're looking at a 70 HP basic with a colorless 1-drop attack, so for decks like Scizor that are very afraid of fire types, you're just going to chuck in a couple of Articunos just as some quick counters. The fighting resistance doesn't hurt either, since Machamp was used a lot in these e-reader formats, so at a first glance, this card looks like too much work and not really worth the effort it takes to play it, but when you just look at it from a simpler perspective of, well, I'm just going to use that 1 energy free solid attack in some matchups, it becomes a pretty great 1 or 2 of for those fire weak decks. Moving on to Fire Red and Leaf Green, when we got our first Articuno EX, it's a beautiful card. Especially looking at it in person, the picture does not do it justice. With the return of lowercase EXs coming back to the TCG with Scarlet and Violet, I'm really hoping they bring back these borders, because those borders really help the artwork pop sometimes. As far as usability goes, Articuno is a basic with 110 HP, which was good for the era. It was an EX card, so if it got knocked out, your opponent was taking 2 prizes, so do the power and the attack, make it worthwhile. With Legendary Ascent, whenever you play Articuno to your bench, you can get a free retreat for your active Pokemon, putting Articuno in the active position, moving over any basic water energy, so it does require a little bit of setup to get off that surprise Cold Crush straight out of your hand. And the surprise factor is about all you're going to get, because 50 damage off of 3 energy isn't great for an EX. And there was an errata on this attack to where whenever you are discarding an energy card off of your opponent's defending Pokemon, the player using and attacking with Articuno gets to pick, not the opponent. But the setup required to get those 3 water energy onto Articuno straight out of hand is a bit much, especially when the payoff isn't that spectacular. So this is more of like a mid-game drop just for that surprise factor, and because of that, it's going to be like a 1 or a 2 of in a mono water deck. This card does fit great with a water deck that is weak to lightning, since you do have an alternative attacker that you can just switch into straight from the hand that is weak to metal instead. Now, I will say that during this specific era of the TCG, Metagross was seen a lot of use, and so The usability of Articuno really depends on what the metagame and matchups are that you're anticipating you're playing against too. So earlier when I was talking about the Skyridge Articuno and that potential combo you can have with Lantern, the reason that you don't actually see that in the meta is because that combo works way better with the Aquapolis Suicune. And unfortunately, that's what's happening with Articuno EX as well. The reason you don't see it in any EX era water decks is just because the Suicune EX from the Team Magma Team Aqua set is just better. It's just a better card. But we'll talk more about that when the Beast Trio gets a TCG History, and yes, they will, probably right after this trio. Team Rocket Returns gave us another try at an Articuno EX. This time, it's Rocket's Articuno EX, which is a Dark type. Even with a Dark Energy attached, it's not gonna help out this card a lot. I mean, Free Solid does have some energy acceleration, which means you get an Ice Wing off sooner, but even with the added 10 damage thanks to the Darkness Energy, 60 damage off of Ice Wing, it's not doing a lot, because you have to remember, in the EX era, you really have to shine to beat out all of these other top tier cards. Even as a big basic, you're still having to compete with things like Zapdos EX and Lugia, not to mention all of the big stage 2s that you can rare candy straight up into, like Rain Dance Blastoise, or even just the competition this card has from non-EX amazing cards of the water type, like Ludicolo, or the dark type in Tyranitar. It just didn't have what it takes to be a competitive card. Weirdly, for an EX, this does feel a lot more like a starter deck star than anything else from this era. Alright, we got a Black Star promo. This is the third chance at making an Articuno EX. What do we do with it? Well, gave it some shit artwork, that's for sure. The Pokebody is interesting, I will say that. This opens up the door to make a fun novelty deck, a good power of one theme deck where you have Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, all in the same deck. But that's kind of all the synergy that they're getting. Like, come on, at least give other perks that are available from the Zapdos EX promo and the Moltres EX promo. It doesn't help to have 3 cards that all give each other a free retreat cost. Okay, yeah, I get it. You know, that means that you can hit for 3 different weaknesses off of your EX birds. You can switch them around. It makes Ice Gift easier to give away those energy to another bird before you swap into it, but it's still not a lot. It doesn't leave a lot of room for what you can actually do with these decks, since those secondary attacks do need 2 specific energy. Now, you change that to a water and 2 generic energy, you're looking good. You're looking a lot better for these decks, but even with the Zapdos and the Moltres EX, they require 2 specific energy, specific to their card types, and so the gifting attacks for one colorless doesn't go a long way. And don't get me wrong, it's a fun deck to play, and there's potential there to make it a good deck, a competitive deck, but you know, the cards themselves, you know, they limit what you can actually do, unfortunately. If you recall earlier in the video, I was talking about how some Articuno artwork leans a little more towards the side of just being a blue bird. And whenever I said that, what automatically comes to mind is Majestic Dawn Articuno. Just such a normal-ass looking legendary Pokemon. But how is the text looking? So Freezing Screech is a pretty fun Poke Power. It sucks that you do have to flip a coin for it, but if you didn't, it would probably be broken. You can abuse this power by just playing Articuno onto your bench, playing Super Scoop Up to get it back in your hand, then just playing it again. If you're wanting multiple chances at automatic paralyzation, or if you miss the coin flip on the first one, but Super Scoop Up does require a coin flip too, so you're potentially putting in a lot of card work with no payoff. And it doesn't really help that a 3 energy blizzard attack isn't really worth the setup either. So even just as a one-of, the coin flips make or break the absolute usability of this card. Supreme Victor's had an Articuno in it. The artwork's pretty nice, but you know, we've already talked about how 50 damage for 3 energy is not great, and This Articuno just tacks on another energy to the cost with all of the power creep that's been happening in the background between formats, so yeah, this thing's not usable. Supreme Victors also had a reprint of the Black Star promo Articuno, this time with the original airline artwork with all of its holofoil glory, and this is a nice looking card here. You know, some Pokemon just don't make a very good transition from two-dimensional artwork into 3D models. I mean, just look at like Typhlosion or Haxorus. I think Articuno probably fits in that category too, to where when you put this thing into CG, it really takes away a lot of those features you do want to see in a legendary Pokemon, like the majesty, the coolness, the beauty. The artwork on Next Destiny's Articuno looks worse than Articuno did in Pokemon Snap on the 64, somehow. Aside from the artwork, this is just another filler card. Those attacks cost way too much. I'm glad they did beef up the damage a little bit, but still not good. Plasma Storm. Man, this is another format where, even as a legendary Pokemon, even as a big basic EX Pokemon, it was really hard to get the spotlight because there was just so much else going on. This was a pretty hyper-competitive format where, you know, you had the return of Rain Dance, so you could see some use from this Articuno, but it was just being outclassed by stuff like Keldeo and Kyurem. Even as just a legendary EX, you still had Thundurus, Landorus, Deoxys, Mewtwo, Genesect, Virizion, Jirachi, Darkrai. This format was full of cards like this. So even though Articuno did step up its game, it still had a lot of competition that put this as like a second or third class card. But going back to the kind of joke deck, the power of one deck where you use Articuno, Moltres, and Zapdos all in the same deck, back in the days of early XY, kind of late black and white era TCG, I would run into that joke deck online, and I lost to it a few times because of the coverage that you could get between not just the three legendary birds, but also Lugia was included in that deck, and Plasma Lugia was great. On top of that, having, you know, three different attack options that kind of work together with these Plasma legendary birds, it was a fun deck to play against, I will say. And there was a full art version of this card, I guess that's worth mentioning. Legendary Treasures, another filler Articuno card, not much to say here. So on to Roaring Skies, where we finally get enough power creep to actually bump Articuno's 4 energy attack up to 100 damage. It's still not a great 4 energy attack, but you do get a little bit of support from Find Ice. But I do really like the artwork on this one. It's very dynamic and powerful, and there's something about that slightly blocky style that I really like. I don't know, it just does it for me. Roaring Skies did have another Articuno that was more usable because of that plus ability that the card has. Anything you knocked out with this Articuno, you were getting an extra prize card for it. So a 1 energy attack that puts your opponent's Pokemon to sleep, pretty good. Potentially gives you more time to add those chunks of damage up with Tri-Edge, depending on how you hit those coin flips. But again, we get an example of how fluff and feathers do not translate very well into CG models. Just something about this, the size of Articuno's head compared to what it looks like its belly when it's actually just like chest fluff. Just, oh man, I hate looking at this thing. The other Articuno from this set got a CG alternate art that I think looks much better just from the pose and the way they handled the model itself. I guess it's just up to opinion and taste. Next up with Celestial Storm, we have Articuno GX. You get to see all 4 of its glorious artworks here. Is this a step up from any of the attempts at an Articuno EX? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Now, 170 HP on a basic is pretty good, even in the Sun and Moon era. We get a return of the legendary Ascent ability, meaning that you can drop Articuno from your hand onto the bench, swap it on up into the active position, and take any water energy on your active Pokemon and go ahead and attach them right onto Articuno GX. And those water energy don't have to be from your active Pokemon. It just says from your other Pokemon. So as long as you've got 3 water energy on the field you can go ahead and move them on over to Articuno when it hits the active position. And that's not bad. The problem is the rest of the card. 130 damage off of Ice Wing is not going to be enough to OHKO anything on turn 3 when you would be using it. And that's really what you're looking for in any format that's heavy on 2 prize Pokemon or even 3 prize Pokemon. And then Cold Crush GX, which is a move you can use once per game, is so situational that I feel like it almost works against the Legendary Ascent ability, to where if you're going to be using Cold Crush GX for only 1 water energy, then ideally that's the only energy you have attached to Articuno, and you're using it against an opponent's Pokemon that has a bunch of energy on it. So then, in a way, it kind of levels the playing field with whatever your opponent's active is, especially if they've had more setup than you've been able to accomplish. But just having an ability and a GX attack that don't have very much synergy together, I don't think they have any synergy together, really. It's kind of disappointing, but if I'm missing something here, you know, if there's an Articuno GX player down in the comments, let me know what I'm missing. I would actually say that the Sun and Moon promo Articuno is much better than the Articuno GX. It's a single prize attacker. You can splash it into anything for some water coverage. Gust is a decent attack that if you're hitting for weakness, you got 60 damage off of 2 energy. That's not bad for a coverage card. And then with Sheer Cold, you can actually gain some tactical advantage there too, to where if you hit the coin flip, you're basically buying yourself another turn. And if you keep hitting coin flips, you could buy yourself a game with this card. I'm just saying. I know that there are plenty of ways for your opponent to get away from that Sheer Cold added effect, but I'd always rather go with a 3 energy, 100 damage attack with a decent effect than a 3 energy, 130 damage attack with nothing else. In Team Up, we got an Articuno that's a pretty interesting support card. I really wish that Blizzard Veil was also active when Articuno was on your bench. It would make it a lot more useful. But even if you have it in the active position as an attacker, you know, 2 energy, 70 damage, not that bad. Not bad at all. It's a lot better than a lot of the other Articunos we've talked about just before this one. But yeah, it protects your bench Pokemon from getting gusted out by various supporters, while also helping set up water Pokemon on your bench by consistently moving those water energy from Articuno onto those bench Pokemon. Another point about Articuno cards that I want to bring up is that a lot of times the Japanese version looks much better just from an aesthetic point of view because of the silver border. It just fits the aesthetic of Articuno so much better than the ugly yellow border. It really makes me wish that they would just update all cards to some form of international version that has the silver border on it, but I get that some people like the classic yellow look. Hidden Fates. Here we have the full art by Mitsuhiro Arita doing an amazing callback on this card to artwork he had previously done for the Articuno Moltres and Zapdos Jumbo promotional card. And I gotta say, the naming conventions on both of these team-up cards really bug me. But that's okay because the art looks nice. 300 HP on a basic Pokemon? Yeah, okay. That's pretty damn good. An attack that requires 4 energy of 3 different types? That's a little more difficult to pull off. 210 damage is pretty good. That's going to get some OHKOs, but not quite all the way there. What's really fun with this card is if you can actually pull off that Sky Legends GX attack. That being said, while it is fun when you can pull it off, you're not going to get to use it very often. It's not a very usable card just because of the attack costs. There are better tag team cards to use, and I don't think that this one saw very much play. At least I never saw it being played very much. You can always correct me down in the comments. But from a collector standpoint, this is probably one of the better team-up cards. The original Arita artwork is my favorite of all of the different artworks there are for this card, but I will say that stained glass promo is super nice, and it's a great place to start a collection. Whether it's just singles or you're collecting graded cards, it's just a unique piece to have, and you can get it fairly cheap. There are PSA 9s of the stained glass promo on eBay right now for like 30 to 35 bucks. I was saying at the beginning of the video that I really enjoyed the Galarian birds. That being said, Articuno's my least favorite of the 3. In the TCG, it is also the one to see the least amount of play. And not because it's bad, just because of the way the metagame kind of unfurled. Any ability that lets you draw cards is always going to be good. Ray does a decent chunk of damage and confuses your opponent, which strategically can force them into a position of needing to retreat or heal in the active position somehow. So far, there just really hasn't been a niche or a need for a big psychic type. The reconstitute ability doesn't really matter because Greninja is just way better at getting you cards. Not to mention the Inteleon engine that you can just tack on to any deck. Same thing with Bibarel. And it's just the way the metagame has played out so far, where if you're a psychic type not named Mew or Mewtwo, then you're already like a second or third class deck from the get-go. But regardless of playability, the Galarian birds are popular Pokemon, especially since they are relatively new, while also calling back to the original 150. And so they have been reprinted multiple times across sets. In particular, I do really like the Trainer Gallery birds. So let me know down in the comments what your favorite Galarian bird is, or if you like them in general, but also what's your favorite artwork for the Galarian Articuno V, since there are several to pick from. In Evolving Skies, we got a single prize Galarian Articuno, or what a lot of people would call Baby Articuno, that has a pretty interesting ability. With Cruel Charge, whenever you play the Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you can just go ahead and attach 2 Psychic Energy to it from your hand. The problems being, you have to play it onto your bench in order to use this, so if it starts in your active position, you're not getting the energy acceleration. And you have to have the 2 Psychic Energy in hand, which isn't necessarily difficult, but if you're wanting this to truly be like a surprise attack for your opponent, then you need to get Articuno down, get the energy on it, find a way to get it into the active position, attach energy per turn, and then use Psy Laser, which is gonna discard all of those psychic energy off of Galarian Articuno. It's a lot of work to put into an attack that is probably not going to hit for weakness, since you're probably going to be targeting one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and is going to leave your Articuno as a sitting duck with no energy attached to it and a retreat cost of 2, so it's not great. At the very least, you're probably just going to trade prizes with your opponent, and there's a lot more efficient ways to do so in this format. For the Pokemon Go set, we went back to Classic Articuno since it is the team mascot for Team Mystic, the bane of my existence for the first couple of years of Pokemon Go since I was a Valor player. Ice Symbol is an okay ability. It's gonna be a plus power for all of your water Pokemon, and it can stack. So if you've got 4 Articuno on your bench, your water type active's gonna be dealing 40 extra damage, but man, that is very little payoff to get for filling 4 cards of your 60 card deck with Articuno. And there are just better ways to do that perfect math to get the exact amount of damage that you want on your opponent's active without having to just do a blanket increase to damage by just having more Pokemon on your bench, because those are going to get gusted out and attacked or just knocked out from the bench if you're playing against something like Urshifu, which is odd that with the surprising amount of playable cards from this Pokemon Go set that the birds aren't really part of that. Okay, so at the time of creating this video, Silver Tempest has not released, but I do know that there is an Articuno in that set. I'm trying to complete a bunch of videos to release on a more regular basis, and so I'm kind of just slowly working on videos over time. But as for right now, this Articuno has not been revealed in English, but there is a PokeBeach translation. There's not a lot of buzz around this card, understandably so, since it's seeming like just another filler card like Articuno has kind of become in a lot of these sets. As newer Pokemon get the spotlight, it's understandable. I just wanted to chuck this in at the end of the video so I was getting as much Articuno coverage as I possibly could at this time. And that is going to conclude our Articuno TCG history video. As always with the history videos, if I forgot an Articuno, you let me know down there in the comments, or if I was completely wrong about the viability of a certain Articuno card, please correct me. I'll pin you right up at the top of the comments so everyone can see how wrong I was. And also let me know down in the comments if there are any TCG history videos you would like to request. I'll go ahead and tell you that I'm going to do the 3 legendary birds, and then the 3 legendary beasts. And so across all of those videos, if I keep getting requests for a certain Pokemon, then I will come back and do one of those videos kind of at the end of this next block of videos. Just let me know what it is that you want to see. I thank you so much for watching. Social media links are down in the description, and I will see you next video. Bye.